It was 3 a.m., and the party was over. The air in the Imperial Suite on the 30th floor of the Las Vegas Hilton was thick with tension. Sonny and I, Red, were standing by the window, looking down at the flashing lights of the city. We were both holding cold beers, but we weren't drinking. Our eyes were glued to the bedroom door, waiting for the inevitable. The suite was usually a place of laughter and luxury. Celebrities and beautiful women would fill the rooms, and the champagne would flow like a river. But not tonight. Tonight it was just us, and the man who made it all possible, Elvis Presley. I could hear Elvis's voice booming from the bedroom. Sonny, Red, y'all there." Sonny's hand shook as he set his beer can on the bar. "Yes, boss here," he called out. I chimed in, coming in. We moved quickly, our hearts pounding. The bedroom was a regal space, with a massive bed on a raised platform. Elvis was propped up by pillows, his eyes bloodshot and filled with desperation. He was wearing white silk pajamas, and his face was glistening with sweat. A beautiful blonde, Linda, sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes darting nervously between us and Elvis. "Come here, Sonny," Elvis said, his voice thick and strained. Sonny knelt at the bedside, and Elvis reached out, grabbing his hands. "Look into my eyes, Sonny. Look into my eyes," Elvis whispered. His grip was cold and clammy, and his nails dug into Sonny's palms. "The man has to die. You know the man has to die. The Sonafabich must go. You know it, Sonny, you know it. Mike Stone has to die. You will do it for me. Kill the Sonafabich, Sonny. I can count on you. I know I can." Sonny's face turned pale, and tears welled up in his eyes. "No, boss, let's forget that talk, boss. I know he has caused you pain, but you can't talk like that. It ain't right, it just ain't right." Elvis's voice grew more desperate. "Mike Stone must die, he must die. You will do it for me, you must. He has no right to live." He was sweating heavily now, his words almost incoherent. He stumbled out of bed, knocking over the chairs and clothes that littered the floor. He was a man possessed, muttering to himself, "He's gotta go." He disappeared into the closet, and a moment later, he emerged with a gray-green M16 rifle. Sonny's eyes widened in horror. "Oh, Lordy," I whispered to myself. Elvis pressed the gun into Sonny's hand. "Doesn't anyone understand? Why can't anyone understand why this man must die?" He started jumping on the bed, his movements erratic. He turned to the wall, trying to climb it, his nails scratching at the surface. "He has hurt me so much, you all know that. He has broken up my family. He has taken my wife away from me. He has destroyed everything and hurt me so much, and nobody cares. He is the one who has done it all." Sonny backed away, tears streaming down his face. He threw the M16 into a wastebasket in the hallway and walked into the sitting room. Lamar Fike, our big Texan friend, was there, looking worried. "Lamar, it's awful," Sonny said, his voice breaking. "You know what he wants me to do. He wants me to kill Mike Stone. He was in there trying to hypnotize me. He put that M16 in my hands and told me to go out and waste Mike Stone, just blow him away." Lamar's face was full of sympathy. "Delbert, cousin, it's gonna be a long, awful night." Back in the bedroom, Linda was on the phone, calling Dr. Gainham. "He's out of control," she said, her voice shaking. "Please come quickly." I didn't know what to do. I had seen Elvis like this before, but never this bad. Linda and I tried to calm him down, but it was useless. Elvis turned to me, his eyes wild. "Red, find somebody to wipe him out. I want the Sonafabich dead. Make some calls, find someone. I could find a hitman in 10 seconds. You can do it, just do it." Those words echoed in my head, and I felt a knot forming in my stomach. I loved Elvis more than anything, but this was different. I didn't know what to do, and the night was just getting started. I remember the day I met Elvis Presley like it was yesterday. It was 1952, and I was a lanky, freckle-faced kid at Humes High School in Memphis, Tennessee. I was on my way to football practice when I saw Elvis leaning against the wall, looking lost and lonely. He was a year ahead of me, with long, greasy hair and a red bandana tied around his neck. He wore a leather jacket and pegged pants, and he stood out like a sore thumb in a sea of crew-cut kids. "Hi, Elvis, what's the matter? Something wrong?" I asked, stopping to talk to him. He shuffled his feet and mumbled, "There's 3 guys outside who are going to beat me up." I didn't think twice. I knew bullies and I knew how to handle them. "Let's go check on it and see what it's about," I said, and we walked out together. There were 3 seniors waiting, and they didn't look happy. I stepped in front of Elvis and said, "I understand you 3 fat asses are gonna whip this little guy's ass." The biggest one tried to talk his way out of it, but I wasn't buying it. "Well, that's just fine. I tell you what, you and I will talk here for a while he just walks home in peace." Elvis took off running, and the bullies backed off. The next day, Elvis came up to me and said, "Gee, Red, thanks a lot for yesterday." I just smiled and said, "Forget it, man." Over the years, Elvis and I didn't become close friends, but I always kept an eye out for him. He was a good kid, quiet and well-mannered, but he stood out because of his hair. He spent hours in the school washroom, combing and greasing it until it was perfect. He refused to cut it, even when the coach and other kids gave him a hard time. I admired him for that. He knew who he was, and he wasn't going to change for anyone. Elvis tried out for the football team, but it didn't work out. Coach Boyce couldn't stand his hair and made fun of him. Elvis lasted about 3 weeks before he quit. I felt bad for him. He seemed so lonely and he had no real friends, but he never gave up. He just went his own way, even if it meant being different. Years later, when Elvis became famous, I was proud of him. I knew the kind of kid he was, and I knew he had it in him to make it big. But even as a star, he never forgot who he was. He always remembered the kid with the long hair, who stood up to bullies and refused to change. And I always remembered the day I stood up for him. But life has a funny way of coming full circle. Years after high school, I found myself working for Elvis, and the roles were reversed. He was the king, and I was one of his trusted friends. But no matter how famous he got, he never forgot the kid he once was, and I never forgot the day I met him in the hallway of Humes High School. I walked into the school washroom one day, just needing to take a leak. The place was a cloud of smoke, and I could barely see through it, but I noticed something disturbing. Oldie Elvis was against the wall, surrounded by a group of guys from the football team. They were laughing and making fun of him, even talking about cutting his hair. Elvis looked scared, like a little animal cornered by bigger ones. I knew those football guys weren't really bad, just a bit rowdy, but seeing Elvis's fear triggered something inside me. I couldn't just stand there and watch. I zipped up and walked over to them. "Hey, guys," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "This ain't gonna do anyone any good. If he likes his hair that way, no sense in hassling him. And if you cut his hair, you'll have to cut mine too." They looked at me, surprised. For a moment, it felt like time stopped. Then they let Elvis go. He gave me a quick, grateful look, and hustled out of there. The next day, Elvis saw me in the hallway, and gave me a shy thank you. It was a bit awkward, since he was a year older and a year ahead of me, but I could see the relief in his eyes. That moment, in 1952, put me in a role as Elvis's protector. It wasn't something I sought out, but it just happened. And it stuck with me for the next 24 years. Years later, I got to know Elvis even better. Sometimes he acted like a spoiled kid who needed a good talking to, and other times he was so helpless that it felt like he was my own child. It was a job I took on willingly and had a lot of fun doing, even though it also brought a lot of heartbreak. Even now, I still feel like it's my job, even if I never see him again. A few years later, in 1956, my cousin Sonny West was in the Air Force. One night, he went to the rodeo grounds in Tucson, Arizona, with a girl who looked like she had stepped out of a 1950s movie. She was all dressed up, and Sonny was careful not to swear or do anything that might upset her. But when Elvis Presley hit the stage, everything changed. Elvis was up there, straddling the microphone, grooving in the most suggestive way. His hair was shiny, and he was moving like he was possessed. The women in the audience were going wild, screaming and crying. Sonny couldn't believe it. This was the same Elvis who needed my help back in high school. The girl with Sonny, who had been so proper and reserved, was now acting like a sex-starved teenager. It was a complete transformation. After the show, she went back to her usual self, but Sonny knew he had just seen something incredible. Elvis was a superstar by then, and Sonny wanted to meet him. But he was too shy, and probably wouldn't have been able to get close anyway. It wasn't until 1958 that Sonny and I finally introduced him to Elvis. We went to the Rainbow Roller Skating Rink, a place where Elvis would often hang out with his friends. It was around midnight, and Elvis was already there with a group of guys, including his cousins Bobby and Junior Smith. They were all great skaters, and they had a game they called War. The rules were simple: charge at each other and try to knock the other team off their feet. No punching, just rough play. Sonny and his brother-in-law, Bill Thorpe, weren't great skaters, so they put on protective pads. Sonny was a bit hesitant, but I dared him to join in. The game started, and Sonny found himself getting knocked down by a girl on the other team. She was tough and kept sending him flying. Elvis was laughing every time it happened. Sonny tried to get back at her, but she was too strong. He ended up hitting his head on the floor and passed out. When he came to, Elvis was standing over him grinning. "New meet, huh?" he said. Elvis played hard and loved the rough and tumble. He was one of the boys, but we always made sure he didn't get hurt. We were a tight group, and anyone who tried to pick on him got taken care of. After that night, Sonny and I were always on Elvis's team. Those were some of the best days of our lives. Elvis was only a few weeks away from going into the army. He had taken a real shine to Sonny, this big, husky, handsome guy. I knew that Sonny was going to be a part of Elvis's team for a long time to come. Elvis had even told Sonny that when he got back from the army, he wanted to see more of him. There was just one small issue. Elvis told me a week before leaving for Germany, "Your cousin Sonny is a heck of a nice guy, but he never stops saying Sonafabich. He calls everyone Sonafabich. I just wished he would stop saying it all the time." I told Sonny about it, and we both laughed. But as Sonny got closer to Elvis, he realized that for Elvis, the word Sonafabich held a deep insult. Sonny told me it was like the word was an immediate insult to his mother, and that was treading on dangerous ground with Elvis. It was 1963, and Elvis was making a lot of money, about $3 million a year. He was buying and renting some of the fanciest houses in Hollywood. One of these houses was in Bel Air, and it was the kind of place that kids from Memphis dreamed about. Elvis was very generous with his friends. His houses were always full of his cronies and the Memphis Mafia. If you were in with Elvis, you got clothes, parties, and even Cadillacs. In return, he demanded total loyalty. One night, Elvis was holding a big party at his house. The place was made for fun, with a special room full of pinball games and a big pool table. I had brought 2 girls to the party, and one of them, Judy, was getting a bit bored. She asked me to move my car so she could leave. Elvis was playing pool, and he didn't like being interrupted. He told Judy to get someone else to move the car. Judy got upset and said, "Go to hell, you Sonafabich." That made Elvis really angry. He picked up a pool cue and threw it at her. It hit her just above her left breast, and she fell to the floor. I rushed over to her, trying to help. She was sobbing and in pain. Elvis told me to drag her out of there, but I was worried. I carried her upstairs and laid her on a couch. She was hurting, and I felt awful. She was mad and wanted to sue Elvis, but I talked her out of it. I told her that she was in his house and that she had insulted him. I knew the others would side with Elvis. Judy left, and I went back to the pool table. I was angry at Elvis, but he was trying to justify what he did. He said, "She shouldn't have called me a Sonafabich. That ain't right." I scowled at him. "Hey man, that little gal is hurting. There was no need to do that. She just wanted me to move the damn car." A few weeks later, I saw Judy on the strip. She told me that the pool cue had damaged some nerves in her left breast. The nipple had dropped lower than the right one. I felt really angry. She was a pretty girl, and I felt responsible for what happened to her. In 1972, a guy named Dave Hebler joined the Memphis Mafia. He was from Massachusetts and was really good at karate. He had a black belt and could take down anyone in just a few seconds. He was different from the other guys because he didn't like guns. One evening, Dave met Elvis at a karate studio. Elvis came in with a group of people, including a beautiful girl named Linda Thompson. Elvis started training with the karate guys, but it was clear he didn't know much about it. He was moving really slowly, and it seemed like he was tripping over himself. Dave was paired with Elvis for the training. He tried to make Elvis look better than he actually was. The others were watching and cheering, but Dave could see that Elvis was struggling. Then someone suggested they have a little tournament, with Elvis as the judge. Dave was worried, but he knew he had to play along. Elvis was a complex guy. He could be really generous and kind, but he could also be quick to anger. The night with Judy showed how dangerous it could be to cross him, even if it was just a word that set him off. Despite everything, I still felt loyal to him, even when I knew he was wrong. The day Elvis came to my karate studio was one of the most bizarre and memorable experiences of my life. It was a warm day, maybe around 74 degrees, when a giant blue Mercedes-Benz pulled up outside. The car was so big and shiny, it almost blinded me. Guys started pouring out, like it was some kind of movie scene. They were all dressed in dark suits, looking serious and protective. The last one to step out was Elvis Presley himself. He was wearing this thick black overcoat with red piping, a turban on his head, and a karate gi underneath. He had rings on every finger and this huge ram's head necklace that looked like it cost a fortune. My two daughters, Lori and Christy, were amazed. They thought he looked like a sheik from an old movie. Elvis walked in with his bodyguards, and I could tell he was a bit out of place. He explained the turban by saying he hadn't washed his hair, and it looked bad. I didn't really care. I was just flattered that someone like Elvis would come all the way out to Glendora just to see me. He was surrounded by his entourage, including Sonny West, who stood quietly on the side, watching everyone closely. I could tell he was carrying a gun, probably to keep Elvis safe. Despite the odd outfit, Elvis seemed to enjoy the atmosphere of the studio. He started talking about his plans to start his own karate system, and even make a movie about it. He promised he would star in it as the boss tough guy. We spent about an hour together, and Elvis tried some basic karate moves. He had potential, but he didn't really take it seriously. He stumbled a lot and fumbled the moves. He was also sweating profusely, even though it was warm inside the studio. His eyes were red and watery, and he looked like he wasn't feeling well. After a while, he and his entourage left, and as they got back into the Mercedes, my students whispered to each other, wondering what kind of drugs Elvis might be on. A few months later, I heard a story about a girl named Jane Robertson. She was a beautiful, innocent girl who had been an Elvis fan her whole life. One night, while Elvis was performing at the Sahara Club Casino in Lake Tahoe, he noticed her in the audience. She was sitting in the second row, mesmerized by his performance. During his show, Elvis threw his sweat-soaked scarves into the audience, and women went wild trying to catch them. Jane didn't get a scarf, but Elvis kept winking at her. After the show, Sonny West, one of Elvis's bodyguards, approached her and offered to introduce her to Elvis. Jane was skeptical at first, but Sonny showed her his ID, and she agreed. Elvis was in his dressing room, and when Jane met him, she was overwhelmed. Elvis turned on his charming country boy act, and Jane was smitten. They spent the night talking and getting to know each other. Over the next few days, Elvis and Jane grew closer. He bought her clothes and took her out, but he also started giving her pills to help her relax and fit in. Jane, who had never taken drugs before, began to change. She wanted to be close to Elvis, and didn't want to seem like a hick or a square. One night, Elvis, Sonny, and Charlie Hodge took Jane to Elvis's home in Palm Springs. They all stayed up late, and Elvis took his usual dose of pills. As the night went on, they started drinking Hycodan, a strong narcotic. Jane took a swig and started giggling. By 4 a.m., they were all laughing and stumbling around. Eventually, they went to bed, still giggling and slurring their words. The next morning, Sonny and Charlie were worried about Elvis. They usually checked on him by noon, but this time, no one had gone to see if he was okay. By 1 o'clock, they were getting really worried. They decided to check on him, and what they found was a scary reminder of how dangerous Elvis's lifestyle could be. That morning, everything felt off. Sonny wandered back to the master bedroom, feeling something was wrong. He went through the first door and then banged on the second one, which led to Elvis's suite. "You getting up, boss? What do you want for breakfast? I'll fix it." Silence. "Hey Elvis, boss, you there?" No answer. Sonny's heart started pounding. Jesus. He pushed the door open. Elvis was sprawled across the bed, lying sideways, The bedroom was freezing like a fridge. Elvis always kept it super cold. Sonny rushed over to him. "Boss, boss, boss, come on, snap out of it. Boss, boss." Sonny was shouting, but Elvis didn't move. His breaths were long and deep, with big gaps between them. Sonny crawled across the bed to where Jane was lying naked under the covers. "Jane, Jane, hon, come on, let's get up, come on." Sonny's fear spiked. "Oh, man, this was it. The whole trip was over. I was sure they both bought it." He opened Jane's eyes. They were glassy, staring straight ahead. She let out a terrible, strangled gasp. Sonny panicked. He slapped her face a couple of times, but she didn't react. Christ, I was scared. He yelled for Charlie Hodge. "Charlie, you better get a doctor here quick. Elvis and his gal here are out of it real bad." Within minutes, a doctor, let's call him Dr. the 10th, showed up. Elvis was starting to come around, but Jane was in bad shape. Dr. the 10th checked her pulse, breathing, and eyes. "We've got to get an ambulance here quick. This girl is dying. We can't waste any time." Elvis was still stumbling around, like he was drunk. He told the doctor, "Come on, Doc, she'll be okay. Just give her a shot of Ritalin. I'm telling you she'll be okay." Sonny was getting angry. "Man, I was hot. Here we had a girl dying, and Elvis is telling the doctor what to do. Damn fool." Dr. the 10th was concerned. Elvis started arguing. "It's just too much Hycodan. She was drinking the damn stuff like water. Just give her a shot of Ritalin and she'll be fine." Dr. the 10th cut him off. "No, we're getting her in an ambulance and straight to emergency." The ambulance arrived quickly, and Charlie and Sonny followed it to the hospital. They pumped her stomach, hooked her up to all sorts of machines, Sonny remembers. Charlie looked at her and said, "Man, she looks like she ain't gonna make it." Sonny felt like crying. Dr. the 10th came over to them. "This girl is in bad shape. I can't promise anything. Why don't you go back to the house, and I'll call if there's any change." Sonny and Charlie drove back in silence. Elvis was starting to come around. He had taken some Ritalin. "Any change?" he asked flatly. "No," Sonny said seriously. Charlie added, "The doctor doesn't know if she's gonna live or die." Elvis frowned. "I told that girl not to drink that much. She was whacked." Then he went to make an important phone call. Sonny was furious. "I don't care how he cuts it. It was his bottle of drugs. That girl had never even touched a glass of champagne, and now she's fighting for her life. And all he can do is tell the doctor what to do and then blame her. Got him, he's a son of a bitch." At 7 that night, Charlie got a call from Dr. the 10th. "She's starting to come out of it. She just might be okay, dropped by the hospital." Charlie and Sonny rushed there. "We went into the ICU. Jane was the only patient. She looked awful. Her eyes were closed. Dr. the 10th said, 'She's coming out of it. She's going to live.' Sonny's skin crawled. He touched her arm. 'Jane,' he whispered. She opened her eyes, and suddenly, she came off that bed like a wild animal. She was hissing and snarling like a mountain lion. I got scared." Sonny looked at Dr. the 10th, who explained, "She doesn't know where she is." "Is she gonna be okay?" Sonny asked. "We don't know how much oxygen she was deprived of. We can just do our best and hope." Sonny thought, what if this girl is turned into a vegetable just because of Elvis's drugs? As they left, Jane was still having trouble breathing and needed oxygen. Elvis was sitting in the lounge. "She's gonna be all right, I think," Sonny said sullenly. "But she just might never be the same. She was hissing at me like a cat. She didn't recognize me." Elvis was on his own trip. All he said was, "Man." Sonny doesn't remember him ever calling Jane, visiting her, or acknowledging her for a long time. Elvis had called someone he often turned to in trouble. Elvis always turned to him when he got involved in something he couldn't handle. The hospital bill was paid, and Jane was flown back home. There wasn't a whisper about it in the press. Later, someone brought up the possibility of a lawsuit. Joe Esposito was told to give her some money. The mother wouldn't accept it, but Joe ended up giving them something. They didn't sue or anything. They were real great people. The point was, Elvis had this anti-drug image, and they didn't want to destroy it. Jane loved Elvis. I believe that even if her daughter had died, the mother still would have kept quiet. Jane called Elvis later that year. He spoke to her briefly and said, "Han, when you get a little better, I'll take you on tour." But Sonny says she was out. Elvis didn't want to face the situation. Sonny saw Jane again. She and her mother drove to Las Vegas to see Elvis's show. They were sleeping in their car because they couldn't afford a hotel room. Joe Esposito found out and put them up in a guest room at the Hilton. When Sonny talked to Jane, she had tears in her eyes. "Sonny, don't you know I don't hold that against him? He didn't do anything, it was all my fault." There she was taking the rap for the whole thing. He did get her to drink it. He was the king, anyone would do anything to please him. Sonny grew sad. Man, it was all over for that little girl. Her face never lit up anymore. She seemed deep and quiet and introverted. I'm no doctor, but that experience just turned her completely around, and yet all she could talk about was Elvis. There was a genuine love there. I never heard Elvis talk about her again. By 1971, Elvis was a changed guy. He was no longer the shy, fun-loving kid from Memphis. He was just living for himself and all that damn junkie took. He was like a walking drugstore. Elvis's senior year at Hume's High School wasn't much different from his other school years. He was pretty average except for his appearance. His teachers remember him as a very average student, who might not have graduated if he hadn't tried a little harder. His life in Memphis wasn't much better than in Tupelo, Mississippi, where he was born. His family lived in poverty, just like many other families in the South. In 1948, when Elvis was 13, his dad, Vernon, decided to move to Memphis for better job opportunities. They packed up their stuff and headed for Memphis. Vernon got a job at the United Paint Company, but it didn't pay much. Gladys helped out with part-time jobs to make ends meet. They lived in a 3-room structure in a federal housing project called Lauderdale Court. It was designed for poor Southerners, but their combined income was supposed to be less than $200 a month to stay. Somehow, they avoided eviction. Red and Sonny West grew up in similar housing projects nearby. It sure had the right name because the people living there sure did hurt. We were poor, and so was Elvis. Elvis, like most kids in a new town, was shy and withdrawn. His mom, Gladys, gave him a lot of attention and affection. Gladys thought Elvis was the greatest thing that ever happened, a friend recalls. She worshipped that child from the day he was born until the day she died. She kept him close and always made sure he was safe. Despite the tight budget, Elvis's parents tried to make him feel special. His Christmas and birthday presents were usually a bit better than his friends. This made him seem a bit spoiled compared to the other kids. When Elvis was 14, he wanted a bike for Christmas. They couldn't afford it, but they managed to get him a guitar for $12. He learned to play with help from his uncle. Elvis doesn't play the guitar well, Red says. He only knows the rhythm chords. Most people think he's an expert, but he's not. He has natural music in him, though. He never had a lesson on the piano, but he can pick up a number quickly. While Red practiced football, Elvis stayed home, practiced his guitar, and sang at I Assembly Church of God. Elvis told me he used to slip off his mom's lap at church services and run down to the choir. Red recalls. He would try to sing along. That's where he got his love for music. In Memphis, Elvis would wander through the black section of town, Beale Street, and listen to the blues. The influence was so strong that people said his first records sounded like a black voice inside a white body. Elvis didn't like that reference. He had definite ideas about blacks, Catholics, and Jews. Elvis was sheltered, but he was a good boy. He worshipped his mom, Red says. To him, she was everything. If he ever talked about his family, it was always about Mom. Even after she died, he still talked about her like she was living. Red didn't see much of me during my senior year at Hume's High. We'd bump into each other in the hallways, and he'd pull me out of a jam now and then. But mostly, I was just another face in the crowd. The one place Red saw me at my wildest was in woodshop class. Mr. Hiltpole was the teacher, and when he stepped out of the room, I'd sometimes join in the woodchip, throwing fights with the other kids. That was about as wild as I got. I was a pretty quiet kid, and I didn't fit in with the jocks or the top students. My long hair didn't help much either. One of the big events of the year was the school variety concert. It was a way to raise money for the school fund, which helped kids who couldn't afford things like school dances or football gear. The principal, T.C. Brindley, was a tough guy on the outside, but a softy on the inside. He made sure the fund took care of anyone who needed it. The history teacher who organized the concert had a soft spot for me because I was always polite to her. Red put an act in the show, playing the trumpet with the guitar and bass. He was nervous, and he didn't pay much attention to the other acts. When it was my turn, I stepped onto the stage with my guitar. I was so shy, and I never thought I had the guts to do something like that. But there I was, wearing a bright red shirt and my hair all slicked back with Vaseline. I started with a slow song, Old Shep, and then moved to a faster tune and a ballad. Red was surprised to see me up there, and even more surprised when I finished and the audience went wild. Teachers were crying and the kids were cheering. I won the contest, and it felt like, for the first time, people outside my family really liked me. After that, I became a favorite at school parties. I'd show up with my old guitar and play in the corner. The kids would push me to sing and I'd do it. I was still shy, but on stage I had a different kind of confidence. I started to feel like I could connect with people in a way I never could before. After I graduated, I got a job as a truck driver at Crown Electric Company. I made $1.25 an hour and gave most of my money to my mom for bills. With my earnings, we moved to a bigger and cleaner apartment on Lamar Avenue. I'd use what little money I had left to buy flashy clothes at Lansky Brothers on Beale Street. They had these wild, bright outfits that made me feel like I was someone special. Red kept playing football, and I kept driving my truck. We'd wave to each other when we saw each other, but that was about it. I was happy as a truck driver, but the idea of performing never left my mind. My truck route took me past Sun Recording Company, and one day I decided to stop in. I wanted to record a song for my mom. Marion Kasker, the office manager, helped me out. She recorded my songs and thought there was something interesting about my voice. She played the recordings for Sam Phillips, the owner of Sun, and he decided to give me a chance. Sam brought in Scotty Moore and Bill Black to play with me. We didn't click at first, but one day I started playing That's All Right Mama in my own style. Sam heard it and knew he had found what he was looking for. He recorded the song and started playing it on the radio. A disc jockey named Dewey Phillips played it over and over, and people started to call in wanting to know who I was. Dewey interviewed me and I was so nervous, but it was happening. I was on the radio. Red was still in his final year of school, and he remembered the day he saw me at a football game. I was hanging out under a tree watching him play. After the game, he came over to say hi. I had a car by then, an old green Lincoln, and I looked a bit different. My acne was gone, and I was starting to fill out. Red was impressed, and we caught up for a bit. He invited me to ride around, and we talked about what I'd been up to. It was a weird feeling, being the one people were starting to notice. I still felt like the same old Elvis, but on stage or on the radio, I was someone else. I was someone who could make people happy, and that was a good feeling. I still remember the night I met Elvis. It was 1972, and I was far from the most stable person. I had a string of jobs, and my life was a mess. My mom was always worried I'd end up on the streets. But then I met Elvis Presley, and everything changed. I first saw him at a karate studio. He was sick that day, but his charm hit me like a whirlwind. I felt important, and I didn't know why. He made me feel special, like no one else ever had. A couple of weeks later, I was invited to his house. I didn't know it then, but Elvis didn't do anything spontaneously. He thought about everything, planned it out. That night we all chatted, and then Elvis took me outside to show me his car, a beautiful black Stutz Blackhawk. He was proud of it, and he should be. It cost him $40,000. We went for a midnight drive, and it was chaos. People recognized Elvis, and cars were swerving and U-turning everywhere. He just wanted to cruise like a normal person, but he couldn't. After we got back, Ed Parker and the others had a little meeting. I sat in the den watching TV waiting. Then Elvis came in and asked if I could help with a problem. I thought it was going to be something serious, like a fight or a war. But no, the problem was a Mercedes-Benz in the driveway. He wanted me to take it forever. He gave me the keys and I was in shock. A $10,000 car just like that. I couldn't believe it. I hugged him, thanked him a million times, and I think I even cried a little. Charlie Hodge was supposed to have the car, but Elvis decided to give it to me on the spot. He told Charlie to get a new one, and Charlie called the car salesman at 3 in the morning. By dawn, Charlie had his new Mercedes, and I was driving home in mine, feeling like I was on top of the world. Elvis had a way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room. He could fill a room with sunshine, but he could also fill it with darkness. He was generous to a fault, but he could also be selfish. He was complex, and I don't think anyone really understood him. But I knew one thing for sure. That night, he changed my life. I had split with my wife and was away from my kids, and I was feeling pretty low. But that Mercedes meant more to me than just a car. It was a symbol of a new beginning, a chance to turn my life around. And it was all thanks to Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, the most charming man I've ever met. Even now, I can't forget the way he made me feel that night. It was like nothing I had ever experienced before, and I doubt I'll ever experience anything like it again.